Devon has an unusual arm structure, which is a key factor in how his arms appear. His biceps have extremely short insertions and his arms are very long. Unless he is directly flexing his biceps, or if you check out his arms during a match, they tend to appear relatively skinny, no matter what he does. This combination of absolutely no triceps, short biceps insertions, and long arms makes it almost impossible for him to have huge-looking arms unless he bulks up to 300 pounds or more. From some angles, Devon's arms look small, but from other angles, they look massive. For instance, before his match with Erms, Devon's arms looked so small at the weigh-in that some people thought there was no way he could win. However, when he's on the table pulling, his arms look huge. This contrast in appearance is simply due to his unique arm structure. The reason Devon tore his bicep in his first super match was due to Levin's powerful cup, which completely destroyed Devon's pronation. As a result, Devon's forearm got turned over, and all the strain was transferred to his bicep, which couldn't handle the load and tore. Devon explained in interviews that his injury happened because he intentionally tried to false start in the setup. Devon was maxed out in the setup before the match even began. Levin held him at max exertion, and despite that, he still ripped right through Devon's defense. Biceps are just one part of the force-producing muscles responsible for elbow flexion. The brachioradialis and brachialis actually produce much more force in many situations. The bicep plays the most significant role when you're in the worst position possible, inches from the pin pad with your palm up. This position puts the bicep under extreme strain, and this is where its role becomes critical. Dinas, for instance, has inhuman bicep strength and was able to defend Devon's hits quite effectively while being in a completely palm-up position. However, you can't rely solely on biceps forever, no matter how strong they are. Eventually, they will give out, which is why it is essential to have other tools in your arsenal when arm wrestling. In Devon's case, his hand was connected to his entire body during the match. His shoulder, chest, and back were all engaged and in a position to contribute to his overall strength. Pronation is the last link in this chain, and if it fails, you lose all the power behind your arm. The bicep strength needed to execute a top roll is already trained along with pronation. Brachioradialis is also very important for top rolling, and Devon has enough strength in that area. A pronation lift is similar to a hammer curl but much more difficult. While Devon has strange-looking arms, from some angles they look tiny and from others they look massive. But when he's on the table pulling, his arms appear enormous without question. However, part of the reason for this is the lack of triceps combined with the short biceps insertion and long arms. With this combination, it's impossible for him to have huge arms unless he bulks up significantly. Before the Erms match, for example, Devon's arms appeared so small that some thought there was no way he could win. His arm size has been a topic of discussion due to this visual contrast. How much of Devon's training focuses on his triceps versus his biceps? It seems that a lot of the hand and wrist work, along with the time he spends pulling on the table, tends to be more biceps heavy. Since biceps are a smaller muscle group, they require less workload than triceps. It would be interesting to see how his triceps would look if he spent a few months focusing on training them. Devon has above-average hypertrophy genetics for someone his height, so it's likely that his triceps would be pretty large had he trained them as much as his biceps. Additionally, his large biceps make his tricep appear smaller than they actually are. Despite this, he will never be as massive as athletes like Levin or Dinas or even Voivoda, but he has enough strength for his needs. Devon's usual shape, with long arms and minimal triceps, means he'll never have the same massive upper arms as some of his competitors. His right biceps, however, are quite prominent even when he's relaxed, likely scrolling on his phone or just sitting around. Long arms make it difficult to appear big, but Devon has the arm power he needs, even though his appearance might be misleading. You don't want to be caught in a palm-up bicep position because it indicates you've lost your pronation. However, biceps are still essential to train, even for a top roller. Looking at the anatomy, There are three main muscles responsible for elbow flexion: the brachialis, biceps brachii, and brachioradialis. The brachialis is always the prime elbow flexor, no matter the forearm position. The biceps brachii are most active when the forearm is supinated, but even in a neutral position at the start of an arm wrestling match, the biceps and brachioradialis contribute about 20% of the force for elbow flexion. In a fully pronated position, the biceps are the least active. You need biceps for maximum back pressure, and if you neglect them, you might miss out on a significant portion of your elbow flexion force. Some people mistakenly believe that their biceps gave out during a match because they were relying on them in a defensive hook position, and then they failed. But the real issue often isn't the biceps, it's whatever weakness got them into that bad position in the first place. For example, Irakli probably has the strongest pound-for-pound biceps in the arm wrestling world, yet he still loses to opponents with weaker biceps, like Todd Hutchings, who claims to never train his biceps. Research shows that full range of motion is superior for muscle growth compared to partial reps. For arm wrestlers, full range reps are also recommended because they help keep joints healthy. While arm wrestlers often use partial reps to become strong in specific areas, they are more prone to injuries. It's much better to train for strength with a full range of motion unless you're severely lacking in a particular range of the lift. When doing a bicep curl, both the brachialis and bicep are heavily engaged, and while the brachioradialis also helps, it is not as engaged. In arm wrestling, however, the bicep brachialis and brachioradialis all work together to aid in elbow flexion. The brachioradialis helps stabilize the forearm in a neutral position to give more leverage for the pin. The elbow flexors can only exert as much force as the hand can handle, specifically the pronation, wrist flexion, and rising strength. If someone with a 70 kilos bicep curl has a strong hand, they'll be able to produce more force than someone with a weaker wrist. In contrast, someone with a 110 kilos bicep curl but a weaker hand won't be able to generate as much force. In the real world, there are many factors that contribute to this, such as skill level and mismatched styles. Every muscle is stronger when it has a lower insertion. For instance, Greg Nuckols explains that just an inch of difference in hamstring insertion can increase torque by 33%. This is also one of the reasons why primates are so much stronger than humans pound for pound. Their muscles insert much lower, allowing a 60 kilo chimp to generate much more force than a 60 kilos human who has higher muscle insertions. One of the biggest misconceptions in arm wrestling is that people assume biceps are only useful for curling in a supinated position, which makes people think that biceps are useless for top rolling. This is incorrect. There are three main muscles responsible for elbow flexion: the brachialis, biceps brachii, and brachioradialis. The brachialis is always the prime flexor, no matter the forearm position. The biceps brachii is most active in a supinated position, but even in neutral positions, the biceps and brachioradialis contribute about 20% of the force for elbow flexion. It's only in a fully pronated position that the biceps become the least active. This is why teams like the Georgian arm wrestlers train biceps so heavily. Even though Levin and Irakli are primarily top rollers, you need biceps for back pressure to be fully effective. If you skip bicep training and only focus on hammer curls, you're potentially missing out on up to 20% of force production for elbow flexion.